We're going to do what we call a full body scan. Just kind of take a couple of minutes to tune in to what's going on with our bodies. So I invite you to sit with both feet on the floor. If we were in a place where we had room and, the accommodations, we would lay down. But since we don't have that, we'll sit. But if you could sit with both feet on the floor, maybe your hands in your lap, just someplace that's really comfortable, and close your eyes, just gently, and I want you to start by just thinking about your breathing. Just breathe in and breathe out slowly. And as you're sitting and you're breathing in and breathing out and being conscious of that breathing, I want you to start just thinking about what other bodily sensations are you feeling? What's going on in your body? And let's for a minute just think as you're breathing in and breathing out, think about your torso, your lungs, and breathe through that part of your body and then breathe out gently. And moving on down your body, think about breathing into your whole stomach area and breathing out of that area. Just let the breath go to that part of your body. And then breathe on down through your legs. And all the way down to your feet. And then just sit for a moment and be aware and bring your attention and your curiosity to your body as a whole. What does it feel like? So when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And I'd like you to stand up and just kind of shake your body out a little bit. And then I would like for you to ask this question: what would your body like to do now? And then do that. And when you're ready, you can sit down. Don't want to rush anybody. So, What was that like? Relaxing? Did any of you have trouble with the question, what would your body like to do now? Why was that, Mark?
Well, actually, not really trouble with that. The whole thing of the awareness, I find that very uncomfortable to do that kind of stuff.
It's uncomfortable to sort of focus in and be aware of, yeah.
It just is.
I don't think you're alone.
No, I know. Yeah, I'm a much more intellectually motivated person.
Yeah. So we're used to sort of what our head tells us to do, but not necessarily used to listening to what would my body like right now, and knowing how to listen for that answer. Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to respect it. Like, I've been tired all morning, so I just keep eating. Like, I'm feeling something, thinking, well, I'll have more energy from the food instead of, because I can't really, like, lay down and sleep.
Yeah. And I think that's so one of the ways we live, particularly in this information-based age that's very cognitively oriented, and we all have to-do lists that are longer than our days. So we tend to live thinking and just keeping going, whether or not that's what our body is really up to or wants to do. And when we do that, we get out of the habit of listening to our body because we have to ignore it to keep going. So, one of the...
You asked too, what your body's saying or what you're feeling. I forget what the question was. Well, my neck is stiff. I didn't notice that. So I was
Right.
like that. And then, I had 3 different itches.
Yeah.
Often you just don't pay attention. You just
Right.
take care of it.
Right.
Back of my neck is itchy.
Yeah. To even stop and feel the sensations that are going on. Because when I stop and do that, I realize how tense my shoulders are. And most of the time during the day, I mean, that's not something I'm aware of. But if I stop and just sort of start breathing and just say, okay, what's my body doing? I can feel that tightness and tension in my shoulders. And so we live in this world where we experience our bodies in some rather interesting ways. You know, in one ways, our culture is very body-oriented in that, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on freedom and enjoyment, on fitness, on warmth and love and sexuality. I mean, and we see messages like that all the time. We also live in a culture that's very body-oriented as long as your bodies are youthful and fit and beautiful. But when we're sick or we've been in a long old age, you know, those bodies are not very valued in our culture, and we don't value them when we live in them either. And then there's a lot of, in our culture, you know, there's also, people are experiencing violence and hatred and wars and murder, rape, starvation. You know, there's just a multitude of ways that we experience our bodies in both good ways and bad ways. And part of the issue in our culture is that, you know, we are a culture that grew out of the church culture of the early and Middle Ages, and in that period of time, the church really was preaching a theology of, well, one thing, the body was just lowly. You know, it was the thing that imprisoned our spirit and kept us from being the more spiritual people that we could be. And so there was sort of this divide then in Christian thinking, between the body and the spirit. And there was also a divide in the church after the very early church between the roles of men and women. What was a more egalitarian early church over time, you know, became a very hierarchical, male-only institution, at least in terms of leadership and who could be priests and who could serve in God's name, which led to a devaluing of women and women's bodies. And in fact, women's bodies were seen as the problem of temptation, for men. And actually, men were associated with spirit, and women were associated with sensuality, nature, and the body. And since the body was devalued anyway, it kind of devalued women even further. And the male body was the norm. So then that led to this great divide. So that in a culture that has constantly repressed the body and excluded or devalued all that is fleshly, bodily, or material, and this Western dualism has divided body and spirit, and body and soul has allowed no loving relationship with the body. So when we're asked to tune in to how our body is doing, it can feel really uncomfortable because we just are not used to doing that. And we're just not used to taking our bodies into account in our lives. And we do live, I think most of us, many of us live very kind of split lives. So if you go then, we live in bodies. It's the funniest thing. I have a little bit of a story. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, this one. This is a book called Life's Companion, Journal Writing as a Spiritual Quest. And it has a chapter on the guidance of the body. And this is how she opens this chapter. In 1969, a group of friends and I drove from San Francisco, where we were all living, to spend a weekend at a cottage in Laguna Beach, owned by one friend's mother. It happened to be a time when the Pacific coast tossed up one of its miracles. That night's incoming tide bore billions of microorganisms that glistened on the sand and turned the surf an eerie luminescence. We 5 friends ran along the midnight beach, laughing and thumping the sand with our feet, to watch the water spatter through the darkness like sparklers. One by one, we became quiet, more deeply entranced, took off our clothes, and waded out into the surf. We swam in loose formation. The neon tide coated our bodies, every hair follicle, every crevice of skin, the space under our fingernails and between our toes. I saw my body turn to light. I could almost see through my skin to the blood vessels running like rivers, the bones bouncing on sinew strings, pushing against the water, propelling me forward, keeping me afloat in the glowing turbulence. A friend swam within sight, her waist-length hair alight with tiny stars. She dived around me like a dolphin, turned and laughed. Each bubble bore a candle to the surface. Her lashes blinked brightly in front of my darkened eyes. My friend and I hated our bodies. Like most young women of other times, we were raised against a ridiculous standard of beauty we did not fit. Her legs were heavy as tree limbs, my breasts were too small. We never discussed this. We knew the hatred was there by how we treated and referred to ourselves. But this night in the sea, we were mermaids. We rolled on our backs and waved starry hands at the Milky Way. "You're beautiful," I shouted to her, "if only you could see your hair." "You're beautiful too," she called back. We told each other the truth, and we knew it. We saw ourselves at that moment as we really were. Here in the magical tide, I knew for the first time that body and spirit are one. To love the light surrounding me, I had to love the body held within the light. Isn't that a powerful story? And I think it's so true. And this is just a map of different types of bodies that if you're a woman and you've ever had to buy clothes, you've looked at something like this at one time or another, because it's you identify your body type and then you can go out and buy the most flattering clothes. But almost any woman who's ever looked at any of these will always say, but I don't like mine. You know, the other one is better. And so as we think about particularly older women and body image, I mean, if young people have a hard time with their bodies and not meeting the expectations of the culture, I mean, think of what it is like for older women. Women in general are consistently judged based on their physical appearance and their relationship status, while men are measured more by their accomplishments and or their wealth. And descriptions of women often include, she is so pretty, but why isn't she married? Jamie has lost some weight. She looks good now. Sarah looks so youthful these days. I wonder what she's using. Or I wonder what surgery she's had. You know? So older women confront both personal and societal realities as they age. Their own internal fears of their aging body, which is known as gerontophobia, and the external messages about becoming old, which is ageism, which is rampant in our culture. You know, women will sit and analyze their aging bodies. When, you know, we compare an aging body to the young, thin, societal ideal, such analysis gives way to diminished self-worth, coupled with a high degree of self-loathing. And our society's obsession with being young and upholding standards of beauty that are impossible for most to reach. An aging woman must therefore combat ageism and stereotypes such as old maid or old hag. And as these standards of beauty threaten to marginalize her, millions of dollars are spent each year on products to enhance youthfulness and beauty. And you look at most of the skincare lines these days are all about anti-aging, you know, keeping wrinkles away, making your face look fresh and dewy and young. So that's an issue that I think we need to really think about when we're working with older women particularly. It's huge. And our predominant experience is that we have a body. You know, we have a body for doing all the things that we need to do, for working, for running, for carrying, for loving, for eating, for dancing, all the things that we have to do and the things that we like to do. But if our body begins to stop functioning, we have another experience. And this is, I think, the experience to some degree that Anne's person in assisted living who's in constant pain and is, you know, we are a body. And it becomes a prison. The body takes over our will, our understanding, and it now no longer begins below the head, but it's the whole of us. We are bodies. And I think we need to recognize that we are bodies and start living more fully in our bodies before they take over, is sort of this huge problem that we are a body. And I think as we're talking with aging people, that we do have to acknowledge that there are bodily ills that we have to acknowledge. Otherwise, we suppress the dark side of life and escape into a disembodied world of concepts and spirit, which kind of goes back to that separation again between body and spirit. Without this body, I don't exist. I know I was at a conference one time and we were talking about self-care and I was talking about what a hard time I was having actually taking care of the body I lived in. And this woman said, well, if you don't take care of it, where will you live? And I've always remembered that because it was a really good question. You know, I can have all kinds of ideas and things I want to do, but if I don't respect, and honor this body that I live in, I'm not going to be able to do some of those things. So, but we only learn that we are bodies painfully and in a limiting way, in boundary situations, in chronic illnesses, in handicaps that seem final, in old age where there are no longer any fountains of youth to promise eternal youth. And so Elizabeth Moulton Wendell, who wrote I Am My Body, is a theologian, and she asks these questions. Do these bodies which we love, look after, starve, control, trim, toughen by jogging, express our being? Does our body want to be beautiful, young, competitive, attractive, and dynamic? What about the weight we take off and that body takes back so quickly? So many of us have had that experience. Is it asked to achieve things that are beyond it? You know, when you're in college and you stay up all night, you can do that. When you're my age and you stay up all night, you're asking it to do something that's beyond it. And I think that living in our bodies is actually one of the ways. Dawn was talking this morning about finitude, about being finite. It's our bodies that really put the brakes on so many of the things that we would like to do, and teach us what it means to be limited, to be only able to be in one place at one time, even though our list would like us to be in 3 places at one time. And just, you know, it's the limits of our body where we really bump into this idea that even though I may be able to think my way through lots of things, my body has to take me there. And it does have limits. And I need to learn to respect those limits. So, part of our call, I think, is to begin to learn to listen for the body's voice. Being a body can be a happy experience. You know, it provides us a sense of well-being, of being alive. When we stop and can kind of consciously experience our body's rhythms, we can be happy with being one with nature and the pleasure that all that brings. When our body is perceived sensitively, it has a voice of its own which can't be ignored. But when do people who experience themselves through will and understanding hear such a voice? You know, Mark, you said, I'm a head person. And I was at a workshop. Actually, this is where I met Carlene. The workshop had to do with body and using our body and moving our body and just becoming more aware of bodily things. And I'd had this great experience in the middle of the night, and I was talking the next day about that and saying, and I'm going to do blah, 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 blah. And Carolyn, who was leading the workshop, said, so what does your body say about that? And I thought, what a strange question. But the more I thought about that, I thought, well, that really is the question. I so often have these great visions, but, you know, I don't know where and it's sort of like, we had done an exercise where we were walking around and someone was holding on to our waist, and so we were walking and kind of dragging this person behind us. And it was sort of an exercise, and this is what it feels like to carry your issues around. You know, this something that's sort of holding you back, and you're kind of trying to walk against it. And when she asked me, well, what does your body say about that? I thought, oh, well, my mind is like my body was when we were doing that exercise. I was leading, and I'm going to go no matter what this person behind me that I'm trying to drag along thinks or wants to do. And that's sort of the way I treat my body. You know, I'm in charge, that's my head, and I'm just going to take my body with me, and it really doesn't matter what my body wants. So whether my body needs to eat or needs sleep or needs exercise or whatever, that's not the important thing. And she just really reminded me that, maybe I need to find out what my body wants. That might be part of the key into sort of living more fully into who I am, and is becoming more fully an embodied whole person. So, trusting and thinking with the body. When one has understood that life means not only joy, but also sorrow, despair, helplessness, and anxiety, then one will simply come to accept everything. One will understand not only with the head, but with one's whole body, that one must soak up everything so that our life juices do not dry out. A theology of embodiment seeks to give people the courage to use their senses, which atrophy in a rational culture, to stand by themselves and their experience and accept themselves with their bodies, to love them, to trust them, and their understanding, and to see themselves as children of this earth, indissolubly bound up with it. And Moltmann goes on in great length in this book about how when we become separated from our bodies and are living mostly in our heads, we also separate ourselves from the earth and the natural processes that are going on around us. And I thought that was a really interesting connection. And she quotes in her book this woman, let me see if I can find this, named Maxie Wander, who was suffering from cancer, had grown up in East Germany, was a very rational person, and she had actually suffered the death of her daughter, and she began to find healing into just really keying in to what was going on in her senses and in the world around her. And she wrote to a friend, "I have devised an exercise for reviving my dead senses, to catch the nature and color of every day with words, signs, signals, like fishing lines. Today my day smelt of sunny fields, the breeze in the treetops, a millstream, forget-me-nots, Danny's bottom, or the day begins with morning coffee, summer clouds, jays and saplings, sounds in the wind, murmuring, splashing like water, nothing, everything. The next day in the Nikolai Church in Saxony, looking down from the gallery at the high nave, dark blue with brown pillars, brown like milky coffee like a gypsy's legs, and sunlight streaming diagonally from colored windows. A young man comes in, sits at the organ, his large vital skull bent forward, intent, short-sighted, the thunderous sound of Bach, old women in front of the pulpit, putting the flowers and fruit from the harvest festival in baskets and gossiping. A mild brown noon, young for eyes and ears, old only for the nose. The old walls smell of dust. And Moltmann goes on in this book to challenge us to use all of our senses, to use our eyes to see our own uniqueness, and opens us to an extended, generous, understanding eye for others. Using our skin not just to market ourselves as young and beautiful things and our feelings, but to feel touch and our own feelings and be awakened to the feelings of others. Using our ears to listen to ourselves and perceive our voices that have long gone unheard. And using senses in combination to create new modes of understanding. Aging bodies, old age is in an intermediate stage of life, like an illness, but it is part of the law of life like birth, growth, procreation, and death. And the reality is that in old age, our tissues change, our capacity of cells to renew themselves diminishes, organs regress and become weaker, Hair becomes whiter and thinner. Skin folds develop. Muscle loss and skeletal ills lead to difficulty in walking eventually, sometimes. So that's just a reality. And even though we live in a culture that would very much like to deny that reality, it is a reality that we need to take deep within us and live into. And so one important experience could grow out of women's experiences to help us better understand aging, that our bodies and we ourselves in them undergo processes of change, which are not only losses of youth, activity, and functions, but also lead to other new periods of life in which unsuspected possibilities lie. Aging could be experienced as a decline or cessation of particular forces which we no longer need, and as an intensification of other energies we have hardly lived out. And if you think about that, going back to using your senses, as people have maybe more time on their hands and less physical energy, there may be ways that we could call them to really become aware of all of their senses. The beauty that's in the world around them, the smell of coffee in the morning, the touch and feel of things. So, growing old, we really don't have to beautify it, but we need to see it accurately and without anxiety, so that we see reality and in it a single liveliness and a single history. We talked this morning about seeing the story in people's faces, and their story has been experienced in their body as in time also. And our body actually carries a lot of information and a lot of our history that we tend to not tap into because we are so concerned about what we remember cognitively. But it can be another whole way of entering into both our past and our future, and allowing us to experience ourselves and to experience others more deeply. I do have some things that I just want to show you really quickly about spiritual practices that incorporate body stuff. There's this wonderful book called Praying with the Body, Bringing the Psalms to Life, that incorporates movement in saying the psalm and chanting the psalm. There's this book called The Soul Work of Clay, Hands-on Spirituality. And she goes through several exercises, talks about clay and working with clay as a spiritual practice and a means to kind of grow your spiritual life. This book, Praying with Our Hands, is 21 practices of embodied prayer from the world's spiritual traditions. It's just got a short page on each one, hand movements of the body, different ways to incorporate bodies into prayer. This is one that I have enjoyed, Praying in Color, Drawing a New Path to God. So instead of saying prayers, you draw prayers, and she uses felt tip pens, and she just has some really wonderful ideas for incorporating. So it's incorporating some action into your life. I just bought this, and I like to make cards, and I'm really more drawn to collage than scrapbooking, but it's the scrapbooking journey. And it's ways of, she was in one of the early exercises, okay, you have a page. There are limits in that page. So, and you have to choose what you're going to put there, and it's sort of an object lesson for our lives. And in our finitude, we can only do so much. And, so she's reflecting on life and on ways of putting together memories and commemorating events in this book, which I just have found really, really interesting. There's a book from, there's an organization called Practicing Our Faith at Valparaiso University in Indiana. They've done a whole series on different spiritual practices, and this one is on honoring the body. And it just has lots of different ideas for how to nourish, think about pondering the mystery of the body. We need to end this section, and Carlene is here with us, and when I was at that body workshop with her mentor, Carolyn, Carlene shared with us kind of a sacred dance. And I'm going to have her do that for us as a way to end this segment and just sort of illustrate a way of being with and in our bodies. You ready to play? Okay.
Sun.